Hi, I'm Matthew Twells. I'm a senior solutions architect here at Bishop Fox. I've been in cybersecurity for the last 8 years, history in defense, aerospace, consulting, a little bit of internal audit, bit of technical project management, and now I'm here helping out the sales and marketing teams put together essentially levels of effort, pricing, etc. So it's a fantastic job and a fantastic place to work. But here to tell you to kind of spin some of that experience and varied people that I've met and teams that I've worked with to put together something useful for the people who either want to be or are being pushed into, or potentially is their next step to step into a real security leadership position. It's actually being in charge, having to actually steer the whole ship as opposed to the small part of it they may have been responsible before. So, as a kind of running gag here at Bishop Fox, we call it the new CISO special, which is usually when someone gets given or applies for or gets the role of a CISO or CIO at a company. It's usually a joke that we reach out. I always also joke that it should probably just be a brochure of our services and a bottle of whiskey based on how stressful the job tends to be. But in general, what we really mean is that it's a really daunting task. It's a really daunting job. There's a lot to get your head around, but it can be done. It can be managed. The chaos can be managed. There's always a saying that goes around like if you need to eat an elephant, you do it one bite at a time. But there's also knowing which bites to take, and that's really the theme of this talk. So really, yeah, the theme of this talk is getting your arms around the chaos. There's a lot to do, and every single part of what you think you should be doing goes levels and levels deeper down to the tactical people who are doing this as a job, probably the jobs that you came from to become a CISO. It's a daunting task. Regardless of the situation that you left, you're starting fresh somewhere else. That's why they've hired you. That's why they brought you on. How do you stop yourself getting overwhelmed? How do you stop yourself from trying to boil the ocean, which is, as always, is a fool's errand? You don't want to burn precious resources, precious political capital, precious money going through trying to fight every single fire, trying to treat every data point as equal, trying to treat every initiative as must fly right now. So this guide is for those professionals. You may not be running the entire program at this point, but you may be essentially a whole aspect of it, maybe application security instead of the entire security program. You might be tasked with sort of wrangling herds of cats underneath you that all want different and competing things from you, and you need to be able to work out different, more strategic aspects of getting from A to B, as opposed to getting from A to B in 8 different spots, which is going to again contributes to that daunting feeling and that overwhelmingness that comes with a job like this sometimes. Or people who just kind of want a simple framework to guardrail their current efforts. No framework has everything in it. This one certainly doesn't pretend to be as exhaustive. But in general, just something simple. A good plan executed properly is better than a perfect plan that never leaves the paper. So this guide here is to help navigate you through your first 100 days in charge of some sort of security program. So breaking it down into days 1 to 30, 31 to 60, and 61 to 100. This first block of 30 days is listening, assessing, and understanding your environment. Breaking into this first portion of what we're going to talk about, I have some experience back in the British military before I came over to the United States. And there's a real, one of the first things that they teach you in basic training is situational awareness. You're going to be dropped into many new, unfamiliar locations, dynamically changing environments. You don't know where you are. Maybe the map doesn't work, but for some reason, you just don't know what's happening. You're not familiar. You're in uncharted territory. The first action that we always get told to do, and it's drilled to the point where people can conjure it out of thin air 20 years later after leaving, is getting your 5s and 20s in. So in military parlance, what that means is concentrate, if nothing else, on what's around you in a 5-meter radius of your body, and then a 20-meter radius visually before choosing a course of action. You should not be, the lesson behind this is that you should not be reactive immediately. Even if you don't know strategically what's going on, if you don't know hugely what's going on a kind of more battlefield perspective. Maybe you don't even know what's happening a street over. You can see, you can smell, and you can touch within the wingspan of your hands. You can see things. Maybe there's some sort of danger that's within visual range. So this is again part of the theme of this whole talk, is that the very first thing you should do in a new situation is get your 5s and 20s before choosing a course of action. Is the bigger concern that you're maybe lost? You don't know yet. You haven't really found yourself on the map. Or is the bigger concern that there's a visible flame hazard 15 feet away from you? I would argue, from a self-preservation perspective, I'd want to get away from the flame or explosive hazard that's 20 feet away from me. Then I would worry about getting lost. I can work that out later. But at least I'm away from the explosive. And getting your 5s and 20s in as soon as you possibly can and using it as a pause before acting reactively is a really, really useful exercise to start the process whenever you're feeling stressed out or the enormity of the task in front of you, to break it down stressful, multivariate problems into smaller, manageable chunks that let you work getting things done. The whole one bite at a time is going to be a theme that you hear over and over again over the course of the next hour or so. So now we've taken a break. We've actually worked out what's directly in front of us. Is there something that's happening that requires my immediate attention before we do anything else? Could be essentially some sort of active incident if you're unlucky enough to walk in front of. Once that's done, you will eventually reach some sort of homeostatic point where you're able to continue with a more sort of strategic, instead of right now, let's look at maybe the next month, the next couple of months. So I'd argue kind of the homeostasis part of the job. And the next step really after that we would suggest, and that we've seen a lot of our clients succeed with, is that even in the smallest companies, even if you've been brought on as a VCISO or a CISO for a startup, it's rare that you're literally the first person in the enterprise to consider security. It may not be someone that they have had the resource to do much about it. They may not be mature, but I doubt either the reason that they're hiring their first CISO is because they have to, and security has been forced upon them by some sort of merger and acquisition. It might be some sort of economic or regulatory aspect that's forcing them to think about security. The same advice still applies, is that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Your very, very first actions upon assuming responsibility should be to start building out situational awareness. There's nothing dangerous happening right now. My 5s and 20s are clear. What's our next point? Let's find out if we are lost. So what you're going to have in virtually any company is you're going to be surrounded with people that have already worked there for longer than you. That tenure comes with a wealth of tribal knowledge, situational awareness, that no matter how good you are at the security portion, you're just not going to have. I've got plenty of experience in the industry, but moving to Bishop Fox, there was a whole new internal culture to learn. We had different documentation, we had different systems, some of which I'd not used before, and there would have been a foolhardy thing for me to do, to pretend that I did, and pretend that just because I was clever somewhere else that I'm clever here. It's all built through experience, and you can stand on the shoulders of giants by just asking for the kind of cultural inbuilt tribal knowledge that you can start benefiting from immediately if you're able to start breaching these relationships. And really, your first thing is just going to be to listen to them. Start building up a detailed intelligence picture. You want to start talking to all the business units. So if you break the company out fractionally into all of the different business units, each are going to have some sort of leader. Might be some sort of team leader on a tactical level. Could be head of X. Maybe it's not even particularly relevant to IT. You just want to start getting an idea of like who knows who, how does power really work. This is all going to be stuff that helps you out when you start trying to communicate across the organization. IT teams, the obvious one. You want to talk to the people who are running the computer networks, people who run the storage. Start thinking about, sort of the basics of the IT infrastructure. That's probably how you made it to CISO in the first place. IT leadership, there's going to be usually some existing IT leadership. They may not be security focused, but there's usually going to be some sort of CTO or some sort of senior engineer that you're able to talk to. Your board and your senior leadership are going to be hugely important in getting anything done for the rest of this slide. You really want to talk to HR and finance, knowing how the organization buys and sells things, how revenue is recognized, what financial metrics the company actually tracks. Super important. And even sales. Sales, if educated correctly and enabled correctly, can either help you achieve your goals, can help drive revenue, and help back you up, or they can undermine what it is that you're trying to do if they're not enabled correctly. So there's a whole wealth of people. All of these people will know something about the business that you don't. And there's almost always something interesting, useful, or handy that comes out of talking to everyone, and it will never set you back. But in general, first step, once you've realized that there's nothing on fire right now, is to move on and just start listening. Start building that relationship, and you'll start building a real reputation for being interested as well as interesting based on your experience very quickly. And this will help you out from a political standpoint later on down the line. This is one I would say is closer to my heart as an ex-internal auditor. The amount of inventory-related findings or lack of inventory, or a finding where, honestly, some sort of dedicated, iteratable and iterating inventory process of just keeping track where things are, where the software is, where our configurations are, what they are, what third parties we deal with, what documentation we have, backups. One of those things was usually the crux of a much larger systemic issue that they had difficulty documenting and then evidencing at audit time, because they never really poured this much concrete into their foundation. Even if it's not your responsibility to maintain them, another really early step that if you have the chance to go and do is conducting an inventory check. You're probably not going to be expected to start delivering week one, day one. Hopefully, there's something for you to pick up. It might not be great. It rarely is, in my experience. But there might be something at least. Do we at least know where all the computers that are currently being used by the company, where they are, who's using them? If we can't answer that question, you have a much bigger systemic issue in your hands, because that's going to then, I imagine, have bled into other areas of the organization, things like identity and access management. Usually, if another kind of military saying is how you do one thing is how you do everything. And that standard that you walk past is the standard you accept. And if this is something that isn't in the organization you're joining, something that's done well already, or something that's not done at all, it's usually going to be then one of those decision points where, is this part of the standard that you're willing to accept, or is this something that then might present itself as something you can take forward as an initiative? The reason I try to harp on about this is that a lot of cybersecurity, especially at smaller organizations, security is usually something forced upon them, either by customer requirements or some sort of regulatory aspect. And most of those audit frameworks usually require you to maintain some sort of working population of assets, software, users, and vendors. Users are really important for any kind of identity and access management. Big part of SOX 404, big part of a lot of ISO 27001, any kind of these large compliance frameworks tend to be very, very hot on user management. And how are you able to tell an auditor that you absolutely rotate everyone's passwords and that all terminated, moved, and joined individuals over the course of a year actually were given access, still have the right access, or had their access terminated when needed, if you don't have a user inventory? How do we know who's on the organization? How are you going to spot someone that shouldn't be there if you don't have this? And things with third parties as well. There's been a litany of breaches this year. Several, they're more aggressive, they're faster, and they're worse than they were before. It's usually through some sort of third party or lack of lapse in security in a third party that ends up being the connection that gets them inside your network. Third party risk is really hard. Third party vendor management is really hard, because then what you're all doing is extending out your risk perimeter out to the new organization, whilst having much harder a time getting proper verifiable information back from your partner, especially if those security processes tend to be fairly onerous on your part. And things with backups as well, which comes to things like ransomware attacks. The backups are going to be the thing that hopefully, if you have backups to restore from, get your mean time to recovery down to an acceptable level, and any kind of outage-based revenue loss should be minimized from it. They're all fundamentally inventory. Where is my stuff? There is no point booking pen tests of critical assets if you can't do a criticality analysis. To do a criticality analysis of your assets, you need to know what they are, where they are, how old they are, and who's responsible for them. Because as a CISO or as a leader, it's not going to be you. The buck's going to stop with you, but you're not going to be able to do it from a day-to-day basis. So this kind of inventory check, it's boring. No one really likes doing it, but it will save you more time in the future than almost anything we're going to go across in this talk. I mentioned here that knowledge is power. If knowledge is power, then doing this right is like having a farm of wind turbines. It's powering every other initiative that you're going to spearhead. This information will back up your control framework. It's going to back up your pen testing program. It's going to tell you what to pen test. It'll be the information that illuminates the rest of the cave for you. Another one here as well, kind of in a similar vein, is that the next thing you should be doing as an organization or an organizational leader in this space is now you know who to talk to, who's in charge, who's really in charge, who's responsible for which business unit. You know what stuff the organization has, you know where it is, who's responsible for it. You can start mapping that together. Your organization is going to have some sort of law, framework, or industry regulation applying to your environment. It might be as simple as just being an e-commerce website where it's just PCI, and you need to make sure that you're not actually storing any information, that your processing environment's as small as possible. This aspect may not be gigantic for your organization, or it might be something heavily regulated like insurance or medical science devices or finance. Could be things like investment banking, where the regulatory weight put upon you is not only large and onerous, potentially liable as well in the current regulatory landscape. So it's something to know that you'd want to know pretty early on in your tenure at a company is what applies to me in my situation, my team, my organization. So what you're going to want to do is conduct a compliance review. It's going to be an inventory check, but it's going to be of what policies do we have at the minute? Are they any good? What procedures do we have? What controls do we have? Do we have standards? Is there guidance for implementing and maintaining these standards? The language is usually very, very confusing when it comes to talking about things like standards, guidelines, controls. This is usually kind of audit, government risk and compliance language, but I think it's really useful to break it down. Is that in plain English, it all starts from what does the organization, regulatory body, or law that governs what you do to make money as an organization? What does it say you should be doing? The rest is all documenting what you should be doing, what you think you're doing, what we'll have to be doing, what you recommend people to do to make sure that we're doing that, what specific guards are in place to make sure that that standard's met, and what specific steps do people follow to satisfy the requirements that are being put on you, not just from a strategic legal standpoint or a regulatory standpoint, but also all the smaller requirements that help you on the whole to become compliant with what you're being asked to do from a regulatory point of view. So again, top level is going to be policies. It'll be the first thing any audit asks you to do is documentation. It's the reason why I brought it up before. It was the first thing that I always asked when it came to auditing people was, where are the policies at? Do you have an overarching security policy? Do you have an overarching IT policy? Can we look at that? And what it'll be looking for you to see or to produce is that a policy is a high level statement of intent by the organization. Is this is what we think the org should be doing. It could be something along the lines of, in this level, at this particular subject of the companies, it could be something like authentication or access management policies. Would be, this is how the organization should be managing its users. And it can have statements as general as, access in XYZ company should be organized and allocated in accordance with the principle of least privilege. So that means people only have the access to do their job and no more. There's a lot of stuff that goes into making sure that happens, and that can be broken down into control objectives. So the targets, the desired conditions that a company needs to hit to be compliant with that policy statement would be, okay, we need to know what jobs people have. We need to know what people we have. We need to make sure that we know what access is appropriate for each job role. And then we also need to make sure that there's a review in place that has been allocated to the people doing that job. If that's all done, your objective for that control is to make sure that that is done. Those are your targets. So you have a control objective to make sure that we have an inventory of people, we have an inventory of roles, and we have some idea of a mapping of access appropriate for this role. That's really all an audit is asking for, is have you had this conversation as an organization? And everything else underneath that, your standards, your guidelines, your controls, and your procedures are all practically the sets of instructions and best practices that make sure that at any given point you can prove that you are giving access out according to the principle of least privilege. It's less rocket science than it sounds. There's a lot of work that goes into this, which is why it's so early in this framework, is because if you can start doing this early, you may, and you should, in any mature organization, be inheriting a lot of this already. If not, then it's something that frankly should be very much at the top of your list of priorities. It may not be at the top, but it should be somewhere close. So use the sort of humorous dumpster fire analogy here, but it is really your next focus is we've got our 5s and 20s down. Start to try and choose a direction to go in. There's going to be a bunch of stuff that's going to jump out at you at some point. We're not going to get tactical just yet, but you've got either you want to start looking at previous assessment reports, penetration test reports, audits. There'll be something out there that's gone, this is really bad, you should fix it. It won't be the only thing that's on your desk that says this is really bad, you should fix it. But you're going to have to pick something to do first. And the objective at this stage, at the end of your around the first month of you being a security leader, is going to be what needs looking at first, what's on fire currently, and what needs putting out first. Not all fires are made equal. Not all data points are made equal. Not everything should have the same priority. And you'll start seeing pretty quickly as well, as you get into this kind of role, is triage is going to save your life. Being able to really effectively go, yes, these are both bad. Things are suffering on both sides, but fundamentally, this is the most important thing. And of my limited resources, this is what I'm going to focus on. The way you are able to make an informed decision about that is by doing the last things that we've been talking about properly. Ideally, you've inherited an organization that's already doing them. In my experience, they're usually falling down on at least one of those, which helpfully should help you in this stage, which is what do we fix first? So apart from just the stuff that we've looked at here too, data classification and inventory. We've talked about assets, we've talked about people, we've talked about policies. Do we know where the data is? Like if we deal with a lot of cardholder information, where is that? That's going to be something a PCI auditor is very, very interested in. If you store cardholder data, is where is it? Are we okay with that? Can we get hold of it if we're needed? Things like retention, etc. If you are okay with that and it's documented, then we can move on. A big one is critical assets. A lot of general people talking to you maybe talk to vendors before, and we talk about like mission critical assets. What's really important to your business? What's actually in a position that if it goes down, it takes your business with it. It sounds really simple, but when you start drilling a lot of people, especially people in charge of some organizations, we discover a lot talking to clients that they have a good idea of what's critical. But when we start talking about, can you provide us with a list of systems, like a list of APIs potentially that are important? Can you give us a list of these assets that are important? That tactical level, that portion at the bottom level that we were talking about before, there just isn't guidance there about what's actually critical from a tactical standpoint. And then when you're booking a penetration test, that criticality analysis hasn't made it all the way down, because that should be fairly easy if we've done the rest of it. This is our critical asset block. The IP address being tested is within that. That's a critical system. To get that easy and make it that easy, the rest of the work needs to have been done beforehand. If you haven't done a criticality analysis, or how one hasn't been done recently, and there's been a big change to the environment, someone needs to decide what is critical to the business in terms of keeping it running and what isn't. At some point, you should have the information at this point to take a fairly solid, educated stab at working that out. It doesn't need to be perfect. There just needs to be a shot downrange that we can start iterating on. It's a big part of something I propose is a good plan executed today is better than a perfect one that never makes it off the paper. I mentioned it before. I'll say it again probably a few more times because it's true. It really does need to be just something that we can iterate on, as opposed to just trying to find the exact perfect mapping of criticality, working about what the definition of critical is. It could be just as simple as what goes down and takes our source of revenue with it. What starts getting people very sweaty and excited very quickly if it's down for a minute? When that starts happening, and start following the money, usually like what generates money, what helps support the infrastructure that generates money, start going out from tree rings from there, you're probably in a good spot to start doing criticality analysis. It's usually revenue generation or protection. Those are going to be your critical systems. And that can be as simple as you start off with. It doesn't necessarily need to be complete. It just needs to be usable. And as a CISO or a security leader, it's likely going to be you making that decision, or at least expected to be able to make that decision. This is something that's very timely as well, is threat actors and the risk landscape. Are you an industry, say healthcare? Healthcare, and I think there's something along the lines of at least 30, maybe even 40 attacks that have hit cyber attacks that have hit healthcare establishments or healthcare insurance companies that have affected more than 2 million people just in the first 6 months of this year. There have been hundreds more than that, but these are just, there's almost 30 to 50 major cyber attacks that have affected just healthcare systems in the US and affected more than 2 million people. And almost all of those breached down to social security numbers, financial information, addresses, more than enough to start stealing people's identities with and have subsequent issues, secondary compromises. Of course, not even complaining that as well, that there's these databases of passwords that get added to from breaches like this that end up with secondary waves of credential stuffing that comes afterwards. Are you an industry that's currently getting hammered or not? So another one could be gaming after the MGM hack. That should really be informing what we do first. How did the last big hack happen? Are we protected? We find a lot of clients are already doing this, and it's really refreshing to see. But if you are in a particular target zone, I think it's safe to assume you probably will be at some point. But right now, at the time that you're taking over, are you currently being a target of large-scale cyber attack campaigns? Access controls. I'd be a very rich man if I got a nickel for every time I found an access finding. And it's one of those things that is extremely difficult, sometimes onerous, and complex to manage at scale. You very rarely see it done right at scale. It's easy to do when you've got 200 people. It's harder when you have 20,000, and people might be being hired, fired, moved without your knowledge as a security leader. So this inventory aspect again comes up over and over again. How are we giving out access? That could be something that's really on fire. Do we have any idea or overarching plan about who gets administration access or administrative access? Sometimes the answer is no. It's someone's asked for it and says it's part of my job, and they go, okay. You're going to find out you have a hugely more significant population of people with admin access than you should have. But this is part of one of the kind of audits that you do. And I use audit in a kind of internal sense if you're just looking around and accounting for things. Access control should be one of the things that is usually on fire at most organizations, but it may not be at yours. You may have a policy. You may have found that out during your policy audit, or you're going through and having that sort of inventory check of what do we need to have our access control because it's something that's a part of SOX, for example, or SOC 2 that we need to go and get. There's going to be some sort of driver that pushes a big part of running an organization's information security program, like access control, that's pushing you to get this thing fixed because it has to be. Another big one is past incident reports, test reports, audits. Do some trend analysis. What came up as critical or high? Did we fix it? Is that documented? That we've remediated vulnerabilities from previous years? That'll be something an auditor picks up. Something that we picked up a lot back in previous audit teams I worked for. And again, regulatory requirements. They're going to come one way or another. Is there any part of the organization that we are not currently compliant with that we know of? Is there something in flight to fix that? At some point as well, from a tactical point of view, you're going to have to pick one of these things. A lot of this stuff may jump out at you as being important. You're going to have to use your experience as a security leader and, in general, do a criticality analysis of the things that jumped out of you as its own separate population to just go, I'm going to fix access first. It's a big... I would personally lean towards the more basic foundational stuff being done first. There is no point building a wall on sand. But it could be something else. Maybe there is a FDA approval for a device of a team that you're managing, and that's what your company does. And the FDA approval is coming up in a couple months. That's going to take precedence over a more strategic thing like access control management. It needs to be the device that we're selling that keeps the company afloat that we do next. There'll be some driver that pushes one thing above the next. Grab it, let's take that, push the rest down, and let's start tactically working on that thing. So that's your first month over. I imagine it will fly by when you're meeting a lot of people, taking a lot of notes, probably have an achy hand from writing everything down and shaking a bunch of people's hands. But at this point, you've listened, you've understood. You should have some idea, at least now. You may not know the terrain like the back of your hand, but you at least know where you're going. You know who the important people are. You know where everything is, or at least the things that are important to you. You know who's responsible for the departments that you're responsible for, and roughly what's important to the organization from a legal, regulatory, and security standpoint. Now it's the time to make a plan of what you're going to do. So now we know what is happening. It's time to make a decision on what's going to happen. So planning, strategizing, prioritizing. So there's an analogy here of when the rubber hits the road. You've taken the time, you've got a real lay of the land overview of the business over the first 30 days, and you've got a solid idea of who the power players are, who the responsible parties are, what you are the responsible party for, what resources the organization does and does not have, does not being probably the more operative part of the sentence here, in terms of policies, procedures, inventories, documentation. If you're worried about getting audited, as many organizations are, these things will save your backside over and over and over again. And every dollar you invest in getting them done right will come back to you at some point, whether that's in stress not had, audits passed, or work that the rest of your team doesn't have to do a month before the auditor turns up. I promise you, as someone who was that person that turned up, we can tell when a document's been hastily written a month beforehand. It's better than nothing, but I promise you, investing in time and resources into this will pay off. You should have another idea as well of what laws, regulations, and entities that the program you're going to build and helm will have to comply with. There's no point building a program that's not compliant with a law that governs your industry and your job. And what it is that you want to achieve. Is there an overall strategy or direction you want to take a program as a leader? Because that's part of it too. You're not just in charge, you're a leader. You're actually steering the ship from a security perspective. And part of it's going to be, if you also focus in things like resources and board level involvement, they're going to be expecting you as the subject matter expert, the person in charge, to kind of dictate what needs to happen, where the ship's going to point. And that's part of it as well. You need to have an overall strategy. So these next 30 days are going to be about putting rubber to asphalt and starting the process of nailing down budget, doing gap analyses, assembling a team if you don't already have one, what kind of people you're going to be needing. So first things first, the organization needs to decide what it wants to achieve and how it's going to measure that achievement. We always talk about, for people individually, setting SMART goals. But also then it's one of these things that when you start talking at a much larger scale, you start talking about whole organizations, things start to get fluffy and woolly really quickly. So you're going to have a development of an overarching strategy. It's different from a plan, and it's different from a mission statement, because a strategy has metrics that allow you to measure progress against that strategy. A plan is, I want to get from A to B. Strategy would be, I'm going to get from A to B via this route. It's about 20 miles away, and I'm going to take this with me, and I'm going to drop every 10 to 15 miles or whatever it is in milestones to get me from A to B. You can measure those against metrics. There's some sort of way of measuring your success against that. It's better than a plan of getting from A to B, because you actually have some idea of how you're going to do it and how you're going to measure progress against it. So the organization is going to likely be required to align the kind of efforts that you're doing as a security leader. You're likely going to have to align your strategy with the strategy of the business. If anything, from when you're this high up in the organization, you should be more thinking like a CEO than a CIO. At some points, it's going to be business objectives first and foremost. If your strategy is to lock down authentication to the point where it's very secure, but it's slowing down business processes across the organization because things are onerous to get through. We're having to authenticate 4 or 5 times because we've implemented some sort of zero trust-esque architecture involved, but everything's taking 5 times longer because people are confused about what they need to do. Tickets have spiked because people are losing passwords because we have to rotate them every 5 minutes. It's up to you, but very quickly the organization is going to step in and ask you to get rid of that. It's a strategy that's likely going to not align with the business objective of make more money and make the money that we're doing, make more money and grow as an organization. And your strategy is likely going to have to be more in alignment with that than it is with, say, the kind of pure security theory you may have in your head. It sounds something that sounds obvious. You'd be surprised how easy it is sometimes to fall into the trap of like, that's not right. And usually there's a good reason for it. Sometimes it really is, it's bureaucracy might be in the way, or it might be some sort of legacy technology that we're just not able to replace. That's why it's not done right. But overall, it's more important to keep the money rolling in, keep revenue and uptime than it is to have what I would say best practice for one specific area. So it's something as well that to think about when you're setting a strategy as a security leader is, does it truly align with the business's strategy? Because when it comes push to shove, it's probably going to be the business's objectives that get pushed over yours. Unless, for example, you are in some sort of highly regulated industry where you are going to be the person signing off, say, on a disclosure. Education and guidance as well is a really crucial part. You might have a strategy. You may not know what you want to do. Does the rest of the organization? Do they know what that means? If you have an idea of making it much harder to gain access to the organization, really locking down access, you're probably going to tell the organization that just from a communication point of view, but also educate them as to why. Is that phishing is a really huge problem. Phishing then usually tends to lead to some sort of weaponized exploit. That exploit might be ransomware. Ransomware can cripple the organization. That financial loss could potentially lead to job loss. There'd be all sorts of things that could be a reason why, it is actually important that we're locking down access. And that means for you, you're going to have to start applying with a authenticator app, and passwords are going to have to change. But at least as a tactical person on the ground floor, I know why I'm being asked to do this. So that education and guidance is going to really help kind of win the hearts and minds war. That will help you get things done on a much larger strategic battlefield level view. And plus, generally, it's just good communication as well from an organizational standpoint, and people will appreciate it. Just knowing why they're being asked to do this new thing, why is it changing? And you might think, well, it's not something you have to worry about. It usually is at some point. It'll affect something that they do on a daily basis. So it's something that may not seem relevant, but it will be appreciated down the line. So again, it's one of those small investments that pays dividends down the line. So as an example here, you can follow this framework if you'd like. You want to cut up some strong short-term and long-term goals that you can use to guide the organization through the next 6 months and then the next couple of years. The next couple of years are likely to change, but at least with 6 months, you can go to the board and strongly dictate what it is that you're going to do next. And you also want to include KPI metrics that can be used to measure success against them. So the example here I used was a application security posture. So the organization wants to achieve a steadily improving application security posture through tangible improvements in penetration testing findings, burn down and discovered vulnerabilities, and training for employees. That's not a plan, that's a strategy. Because it's not just telling me I want a more secure organization. I'm saying that application security posture specifically is we're going to improve that through tangible improvements, i.e. something I can see improve in penetration testing findings, less criticals and highs, burn down and discovered vulnerabilities. That's something you can chart out, and training for employees. You can note down attendance. You can show and record solutions or sessions just like this one that can be pointed to as evidence of training having occurred. The metrics for that, again, critical high findings, burn down charts, vulnerability numbers from any kind of VM tooling that you have, or in general, whoever's responsible for vulnerability management. There's going to be somewhere that all these documented vulnerabilities are handled, risk registers, etc. You can use all of this to be the metrics, whether they go up or down, what the delta is over the course of a year. Policy and compliance here, the organization might have aligned themselves to something like NIST CSF as a general structure, as a compliance framework to make sure that they're doing things right in accordance with industry best practice. And you might be being audited against HIPAA requirements. HIPAA has its own security requirements under the security rule. It's usually things like technical safeguards and auditing of technical safeguards. Can you prove that someone's actually looked and that there are proper guards rails against the sharing and access to healthcare information? That's going to be something that your strategy has to deal with. And education and guidance, training for developers. If you're finding a lot of code-based findings, it's probably a good point there. Some training for the developers about why we're asking you to do this difficult thing, why we're taking some access rights away from you because they were the holes that the pen testers got through last time, is the test through the firewall that you wanted to do but forgot to shut down because we're not documenting things. It's difficult and it might be annoying, but from a communication standpoint, that training might be the thing that gets you your burn down and vulnerabilities. It might be the thing that gets you your lower amounts of critical and high findings. There could be as well cybersecurity awareness for the wider employee base. There might be people working for you that have no idea what you're talking about when you say phishing. There might be people who know what phishing is and are already well above the standard that you need. But you want to make sure that everyone's running at least at the slowest man's pace. And that might be what you need to do, is some sort of general large-scale cybersecurity awareness training with attendance tracked. If we're doing all of that, you have the metrics to track your progress against the strategy, and you have a much better chance of getting there at the end of the day. This is one I'm going to be kind of brush over a little bit, just because it's kind of a whole thing in and of itself. Is that budget evaluation is an area that finance tends not to be the part of the organization that someone stepping into a security leadership role might have the best understanding of. You don't necessarily have to be an accountant. It might not be the strongest area of acumen for a new CISO, brought on technically or primarily for their technical skill set. But in general, you are going to be responsible for the security budget as someone in charge, or you may be part of the team that is responsible for the security budget. And it just needs to be in a position where you understand how much money you do have and where it's going. That is going to be something that, regardless of your financial acumen, you're going to be responsible for communicating up to the board. Is they're going to give you a bunch of money based on the strategy that you communicate and the metrics that you're going to be measured against. And they're going to expect that the money they give you can be accounted for. That where have you used it? It doesn't have to be particularly difficult either. Especially if you're starting as a CISO in a very small organization, it could be something as simple as what you see on screen. All it is here is that there's a category for the budget. Human resources, we have people, you need a team. Could be training for the team you already have. Software, you can have licenses. Could be things like EDR licenses, could be something as simple as Active Directory licensing if you have some sort of large Microsoft stack. Could be all sorts of things that you're paying for to actually achieve your goals. Could be things buying tools, etc. Infrastructure costs. It's going to cost. You're going to have your systems running in infrastructure of their own to achieve your goals. Like, is it all based in AWS? Do you have it on-prem? Do you have actual things like hardware security modules or specified hardware that you need to do your job? That'll come under infrastructure. And then you're going to have a lot of organizations will have budget specifically set aside for things like consulting. You're not going to be able to do everything. And it's better to bring in someone that does know what they're doing so you can stand on the shoulders of giants, see further, bring in someone who does know what they're doing. If there's something that you need to build that you just don't have the skill set for, or frankly, the budget to hire someone on staff to do it, it's worth having some of your security budget to come in and help you build it. It could be something as well as you may be forced to get a penetration test or a compliance audit out of your budget as part of the regulatory requirements. This should be obvious at this point because we've looked at it multiple times over the course of this talk, but you should know that, we're going to need a pen test because it's part of SOC 2. And we need that certificate for our overarching strategy of becoming acquired. And we need to be able to prove that we have the security program in place. Awesome. So then the budgetary requirement for a pen test is going to be pretty easy to make. And then you can go talk to vendors, etc., to find out a way of getting it actually booked, talking to vendors to actually get it staffed, and then actually getting it done within the audit timetable, which is a lot harder than you'd expect. Because again, all of the cats you're going to have to herd as someone in charge. It's not just going to be, I know why I did a pen test. You're going to have to explain it to finance about 3 times about why it costs so much. Why does it need to be 30 grand? Can we not get someone to do it for 5? Yes, but your understanding at that point in your head is a 5 grand pen test is not going to be as good as someone who's doing it for 30. Correct. but it's part of your job as a security leader to be able to communicate that out and justify why good consulting is better than bad consulting and why both of those are better than no consulting, because then we'll fail the audit. And that'll be some of the metrics that you're measured on as part of your job as a leader. But again, it's the general point I'm trying to make here, though, is that it doesn't have to be as complex as it sounds. No one's expecting you to become an accountant. You just have to be able to account for the money you're given and be able to track things like, this is the budget I got given, here's how much we spent, here's the variance, and just notes about what you spent. It's pretty simple. It's easy to read, and it's easy to communicate. But in general, you can start totting this stuff up. And in general here, the examples I came up with was, in this particular example, there is a large increase in spending of $72,000, but there were some large savings. So we've actually managed to come out with savings of $72,000, sorry, and that those large savings came fundamentally from cutting legacy architecture costs and HR savings. So we didn't use the entire budget that we had for hiring. Is that good? Is that bad? That's the conversation that we're going to have next. Is it's not good or bad in and of itself. You can start conducting as a new CISO or a new security leader to hit the ground running is conduct some historical trend analysis on the budget that the security team had in the past. A lot of the times, organizations will give their new security leader like a one-time budget to fix what they need to fix, but it won't recur. So at that point, it's going to be really difficult to find out, well, was that $72,000 great because we're really efficient? Or was there another reason behind that? Is your budget from the last couple of years smaller, larger than it was before? Is it trending upwards? Is it trending downwards? Is it fit for purpose? Frankly, if your budget went up 50 grand, but now it's at 50 grand because there wasn't one before, or it's now at 100, but your costs are fundamentally far larger than that, we're not able to achieve, or it's not fit for purpose. So it may be good that you save some money, but it may just be that you never had the budget in the first place to hire what you needed, so you didn't use it. You used it on something else. You can perform analyses on these, on all the important line items we just talked about, and work out whether those trends and the current allocations that you have align with your goals, that are then going to line up with the strategy you have and all the metrics that you're being assessed on as a either C-suite member or security leader. Is you're going to be expected to not only account for the money here, but work out whether overall we have enough money to achieve the goals that we've been set in the first place. So the example here I looked at is, it's really good. It looks great. We saved $70,000 out of our hiring budget. But the hiring budget's been going steadily downwards over time. Did we save money by being prudent? Is it that we decided we really didn't need a person at that point? Or did we just accept that we weren't going to get that person because we never had the budget to hire them in the first place, because budget's going down year after year? So we're hiring the people we desperately need, but we don't have the people we need to achieve strategic goals. On its own, the $70,000 isn't going to tell you that. The analysis will, though, and that knowledge that you built in the first month of knowing who to talk to get the kind of cultural aspect of why this is happening. Why is the budget going down? Why are we getting less and less hiring budget money when potentially it's more important than ever to have a healthy security team? Oh, it's because your predecessor, or there hasn't been a predecessor, didn't effectively communicate the value and the return on investment that a good security team can give you. Maybe that's something you could change. And if that's part of your goal, then you can start using this sort of stuff to start building a business case. This is something I'll probably spend a little bit of time on here. So we're going to talk about the example here of lack of hiring budget. Building a business case is going to be how you get what it is that you want in terms of discrete money, discrete budgetary allocations or permissions to do certain actions that get you towards achieving your strategy. It might be achieving one of those metrics that is a milestone to achieving your overall strategy. Each one of them is going to need a business case. And that business case is, why should the company pay for it? You need X, prove X. So step one of that is going to be defining the problem, the risk posed by the problem, your proposed solution, and why you think it'll solve the problem. So your problem here is that, say we need a threat intelligence team. We just don't have anybody here that knows about all the information coming in from the external side. We may have the organization nailed down from an internal standpoint, but when it comes to threat actors and talking about TTPs and IOCs, maybe it's just not your background or anybody that's at the company currently. But you don't have a hiring budget to hire a threat intelligence team to run that for you. It may be part of the strategy that's being put on you or something that the company's asked for. It might be part of an audit. But either way, you have this requirement and you don't have the budget for it. So the risk here is we currently have no one skilled looking at the alerts or the threat landscape and reacting to emerging threats. We're reactive rather than proactive, and we just don't know what's happening outside of our castle walls. There are plenty of organizations like that where they go, if we've got one or the other, I'd rather the inside of the castle is secure than the outside. That could be perfectly reasonable if that budget is just never going to be enough to do everything that you want. So they've done that criticality analysis and realized that the information inside the castle wall is way more important, and they'll react to whatever arrow gets fired their way. It's a completely valid decision if that's the situation you're in. It might be the situation that you're in, but either way, there's the risk. Proposed solution. I need a budget for hiring a senior security engineer and a junior security engineer. So I'd say approximately, this probably not realistic anymore in terms of salaries, but in general, let's say $200,000 approximately between them. That's how much it's going to cost us to hire these two people. And we're going to start off a very small threat intelligence team. And the reasoning behind that, why you think it'll solve the problem, is that the threat landscape has changed dramatically since the company's last technical transformation, and we don't have the capacity to adapt to it. It's just simple as it is. It's not particularly complicated, but this is a lot better than going, I need budget for more people. Why do I need headcount? Problem, risk, proposed solution, why? At least writing this down forces you to actually ask. You can do this with all the things that you think you need for your program, but it will force you to start asking questions of yourself of, why do I need this? What is it solving? Do we need this or do we want it? When it comes to that criticality analysis, you'll have to start doing it on this too, because you're not going to get money for all of it in most of the likelihood. So if you had to negotiate for one or two of these things, what would they be? But writing this is going to force you to go through that reasoning process, and it will really, really help when you start talking to the finance people who maybe don't understand, frankly, why it is that you need this expensive person to do this thing that they don't really understand the payoff for. Criticality, I'm going to talk about again in step 2 here, is why should the people with the purse strings care? You may have already effectively convinced the CTO and the other security leaders, and maybe even some of the business unit leaders, but it's finance that might in your organization be the ones that actually sign off purchase orders or sign off your budget for the year. You might know that risk is critically important, but your job now is to start convincing those people above you, potentially, or things like your CFOs or your sort of the people who are actually running the financial aspect of the organization you work for, of the same. You're going to need to convince them that it's a critical issue. And you can, again, I always say lean simple if possible, unless you need something more complicated. But here I just use a visual medium. This is just a 2-axis quadrant graph with a likelihood of occurrence, plus to minus on the y-axis, and business impact on the minus and plus side. If we've got likelihood of occurrence, if we don't have a threat intelligence team because we're not watching the outside, a breach through lack of threat visibility would be high likelihood and high impact, because if we get breached, what's going to come next is some sort of weaponized exploit. That exploit's not going to be done just to watch. It'll be either to damage, destroy, deface, steal, exfiltrate something from inside the organization. The impact's going to be fairly high, most likely. Maybe the legacy non-critical update. We want to update the potentially slightly aging or end-of-life licensing. It's an issue of that being the thing that cripples you is not zero, certainly not. But the impact to it is just not on an absolute scale. It's less important than the not having a team, period, if we're using those as comparison. One of them is, in an absolute and relative sense, more important than the other. Doing this at scale is this criticality analysis, but you can very easily point to a graph and be like, this is worse than this because of these two metrics. Most people understand this from a visual point of view, and it'll help you convince them there's a reason why I'm asking for what I'm asking. And then you can go back to step 1 and use that as your more kind of story-based justification. Kind of build the narrative is that it isn't just a frivolous thing that we want to buy a bunch of tools They do things that are going to help us not get breached. The reason why you don't want us to get breached is because we'll lose $1 million every 2 hours. That's something the purse strings people will absolutely understand. And if this is obvious to you, then fantastic. But there are a bunch of people that maybe came through a technical standpoint that realize that just the technical aspect of why a vulnerability is important or why an ask is important may fall on deaf ears when the person that you're dealing with is primarily given a fiduciary duty to shepherd the money the organization has in a way. And anybody asking for that money needs to prove why. And you are absolutely one of those people that needs to prove why. So this is part of why building a business case is really important. So step 3 of building a great business case is return on investment. And return on effort is a really good one too, which I'll go into in a bit. But fundamentally, whatever it is that you're asking for in terms of budget, it's going to come out of the company coffers somehow. It's going to have to be paid for somewhere. And it means it's coming from somewhere and someone else's budget. Usually, potentially sometimes someone else's budget, or it might just be that giving you $30,000 is $30,000 that doesn't go somewhere else. That might be the correct allocation for that money, but it's very rarely that the pie in a big sense gets absolutely bigger. It's usually the allocation of slice size of that pie that changes year on year. And what you really want to do is use step 1 and 2's results and make the cost benefit analysis of allocating the money you're asking for to you as opposed to something else almost self-explanatory in any way that you can. So this is where building that narrative comes in really handy. If your audience is speaking the language of money, then this is exactly what you should be speaking in. This is not the time to bring in giant RFCs, diagrams showing you what possibly an attacker could do. It's going to be building a business case of why spending this money either saves us or makes us return on investment. Like, we're actually going to get something from this. So I made an example here for this hiring a team. Is that this investment in the threat intelligence team, I did a quick bar chart and just said that I broke down the savings into risk mitigation. So it could be from averted risk, which I've calculated here as the number, so quantifying this, was single loss expectancy, calculated of a critical data breach affecting customer data. Data from link. So you put the link here, like, go click it. This isn't information I pulled out my backside. It's actually there. Like, this is how much it usually costs on average. So that's my first number. And here the example was $300,000 on an annual basis. So if we're able to have this and we avert that risk, saving number 1. Compliance savings. So this could be things like aggregate cost of remediation work from audit findings that we keep getting. Could be another $200,000. And then operational efficiency gains would be $100,000. So I quantified that as estimated time savings of threat-driven prioritized vulnerability management. So instead of just going, we're going to do that one first, we're doing it based on threat. We're doing it based on threat. The most important things that we're fixing first tend to be the things that are the most dangerous. We're getting less audit findings. We're getting better results overall. And we're tangibly more secure as a result. But you can calculate this as well by just working out a ratio of cost of new team based off the potential savings, is that it's 4-1 at this point. So there's a 2-to-1 ROI ratio for the building your new team at a price of $200,000. You've proven it at least as quickly as you can that these aren't just numbers you've made up. There's some sort of rationale from behind them. Obviously, your mileage may vary about whether this is enough, but it's just an example here. But you can see here that you now asking for a team isn't just because you want more people and because you want this thing because it's the new hotness in the industry. You're doing it because there's a real need. There's a real risk posed. Here's why we need it. Here's why it's important. And you've just proven that it also kind of pays for itself over a couple of years. That's way more convincing to the people above you. If you can make all your asks look like this, the chances of you getting most of them go up dramatically. So this is a skill I think that you'll have to build over experience if it's not something you've already done. But in general, it's, again, one of those things like inventory. That time invested here will pay off gigantically down the road. Gap analysis is another big part of the real kind of rubber hits the road aspect of putting work together like this. So you should have an idea now of what the company does and doesn't have in a variety of different areas. We're looking at inventory, documentation, governance, training, etc., etc. I won't belabor the point because we've gone through it a few times already. What human capital do you have to utilize to fix these things, manage these things, do these things on a daily basis? Staffing. teams, skills, management of those skills. Do we know what these people are good at? Do we know what they want to do? What does our retention look like? All that sort of stuff. It might not be your direct responsibility, but it will help you to know. What strategy are we executing against? What metrics are we using to track progress against those strategies that we're executing? What budget do we have to deploy and allocate to achieve that strategy? Do you have the skills to effectively request more, which is what we just went through, looking for budget allocation and making business cases? They're going to see usually, though, in this kind of modern threat landscape, this modern risk landscape, is they want to see some sort of improvement over time. And one of the easiest ways to justify that and to tangibly point to a graph and seeing it going up over time is to point to some sort of industry benchmark. There might be things that maybe they have a tangential understanding of, things like NIST CSF, ISO 27001. Maybe they've heard the names before. They may not be familiar with the actual practicalities of what they're for, what they ask for, how useful they are. But either way, if you can conduct a gap analysis against an industry recognized framework, such as NIST CSF, which I brought an overview slide on this, the left side of this plane here, which is the 5 different sides: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Where are you now in all of these areas, and where should you be against this framework? That, in the crux of it, is a gap analysis. They don't have to be complicated. They are immensely useful when you're talking about large-scale changes. Where are we right now, and where do we need to be? You're able to point against this, and if you can see that gap getting lower and lower over the course of a year, you can tangibly point to that being your program that's helping closing it, helping you build that business case in future, being like, hey, you should give me this because the last 5 things I did worked. Look at this graph getting smaller. It doesn't necessarily have to be this complicated benchmarking exercise where we're going down every single bullet point. In general, it could be just running down the categories and simply comparing the answers you get from asking your staff about the current state of this situation to the intended controls that NIST give you. Or it could be complex enough where you hire an external audit firm or consulting firm to come in and do it for you. It's really, really common for people to come in being like, hey, I just don't have the time to do this, but it's really useful information for me. Can you come and help me benchmark what I'm doing against NIST? I might have done 5 or 6 of those at my last organization because they're useful. And it's really, really useful from a leadership perspective to know, in general, take a snapshot of what I'm doing from a process perspective. This penetration testing is doing that from a technical perspective, what's actually out there on the network. If it's out and vulnerable, we can prove it because we broke through it. Gap analysis is kind of your way of auditing your organization in the same way. And you're going to want to present some sort of summary of findings to senior management. And this kind of gap analysis will massively help you when it comes to building that business case. So hopefully it starts to become obvious as over the course of this, it's the same themes that keep popping up. Doing the basics well, keeping an inventory, everything builds on the next step. Because what happens is when you're starting to ask for things as a budget or to achieve a new strategy or to develop something, it's never just, I need X thing because I want it. You can point to the gap analysis. There's the risk that goes into that box from before. What do I need to fix it? Here's the ROI on it. Either we avoid X cost or we make B money as a return on investment. But either way, you now are asking for things in much better detail. You're evidencing your requests in much better detail. And it's gap analysis and things like it that help potentially communicate what you're doing on a much larger scale to people who maybe don't understand the tactical practicalities of what you do from a security point. But what you can do is just go, we have a gap currently in these areas. Here's a graph over time of us closing those gaps. Here's what we did. Most people will understand a graph going up or down. And this is what you'll be able to develop with something that you can then back up to someone who does know what they're talking about. This would be something I'd say definitely on the later part of it. You definitely want to start fixing things like inventory issues and vulnerability management and all those sort of things, gap analysis, budget, etc. But security culture and security awareness is a really good way to take an organizational pulse check. Cybersecurity is a team sport. You're only as strong as your weakest link. You can spend $7.5 million on a labyrinth of different tools, but fundamentally, if the people on your computers doing the work that makes your company money have no idea what a phishing email is, or that there's no consequences for clicking on said email and they don't know why it's important. It won't all be for naught, but it's going to drastically undermine what it is that you're trying to do. So you're going to want to gauge the overall temperature of the organization that you're responsible for. And you can break it down as something similar as technical awareness and how to report these issues, social engineering techniques. It's likely going to be the people who are least educated that are the highest value targets. And phishing techniques. How are people trying to trick you? If people knew this across the organization at the lowest level, you're going to have a drastically lower success rate trying to phish that organization. And you can put surveys together. It could be some sort of test, but in general, you can ask knowledge-based, behavior-based, or open-ended questions when it comes to phishing or kind of security culture in general. So you could go knowledge-based. What is phishing? Please tell me. What constitutes a strong password from A, B, C, D, E, F, G? What's wrong with this email? Show me. So it's like, do you know this thing? Prove it. Behavior-based would be, what would you do if you're using a shared computer? I personally like these because it kind of does prove someone, if you can explain it back in your own words. Back briefing, something we used in the army a lot, where I'd be like, okay, X, Y, Z, A, B, C, we're going to go do Y. Tell me what I just told you. And you can prove whether someone's listening or whether they've actually understood what it is that you're saying. Because if it's been clear enough, it should be fairly easy to back brief you. So it's either an issue with your communication back to the person you're teaching, or it's an issue with the person not having paid attention. So these behavioral-based questions are quite useful to go, well, you tell me, what would you do? And you certainly don't want to penalize people for not knowing, but if it's their third or fourth time, maybe it is something we want to look at. Open-ended questions could be things like, how effective do you think our current cyber training is? Is it something that you think is fairly useless? Is it something really useful? Did you learn anything from last time? What was the last security issue that you encountered at work? And tell me how you reacted. Stuff like that a mix between the three would give you a really good organizational pulse check about how aware your organization is of security issues, or whether people are terrified of clicking on phishing emails because they're really, really scared of what happens afterwards. Maybe that's a tuning of incentive structures that needs to happen. Maybe it's people just don't know what to do in a tactical sense if they find something on their own and it doesn't exactly match the training. Maybe that's an expansion of what you could do next year, but you don't know until you ask. And that's what a big part of this is. So assembling your team is going to be a really important part here too. Is that the clear, understood lines of communication and a clearly understood mission and objectives and decision-making guidelines are going to be the two yardsticks that you use to build a really powerful team that can operate with and without you. But what I'm going to show you through here are these two examples of two teams built in a different way. So you've done all this analysis, you've done your research, you should be in a really good spot to take a look at the makeup of the teams that are below you on the totem pole and ask yourself, do we have enough people to achieve the strategy? That is not going to be an easy question to answer, and it requires a little bit of all the information that we've been talking about for the last hour or so. And it's going to be a multivariate question of, what does the current workload look like? What are the plans of key players? You might have a VP now, but are they leaving? Are they about to go out for 5 or 6 months on a sabbatical? Are they ill? There's going to be real practical issues. Like, do you have the leadership figures underneath you to achieve the strategy? Do we have the team at all in this area that we now need? So all of these things that we've been talking about is going to affect whether you're able to execute against the strategy that we came up with at the start. And do you need net new hires, or can people be internally promoted? Can you promote someone from within? Maybe you have a bottom-heavy organization with lots of people on these teams. Maybe they could be your new seniors. Do you need practitioners, or do you need people like project managers to kind of wrangle people that know what they're doing? Maybe you have a very technical-heavy, practitioner-heavy organization, but you don't have someone that's particularly good at just managing all of those cats to get from A to B. So maybe what you need is one project manager as opposed to another senior developer. The cost between those two is going to be dramatic too. Can their positions be backfilled? Are we able to? So this comes back to budget requirements, etc. So as you can keep seeing, it all connects to each other as we go through this presentation. But in general, what you'll have here is that the team on the left is well staffed. There's a very, very clear chain of command. So individual contributors are organized into teams. Those teams report to a lead. There are multiple team leads. Those team leads then report to some sort of VP or senior manager. That VP then the group of senior managers across the organization then will report up to the CISO or someone who's in charge. That's going to be you in this case. If you look at the right, this is going to be the current state. So that's the ideal state, is that we have very clear, understood lines of communication going up the chain. I know who to talk to, I know what I need to communicate them, and I know how I need to communicate with them. How, because then each person has their own reporting requirements. The mission, why are we doing what we're doing? What are we doing? How fast does it need doing? How does it affect my job? That needs to be communicated well, thoughtfully, and in a way that doesn't seem punitive. Do that, and you're going to have a very effective team and bilateral communication going up and down the chain. Let's have a look at the right, which is going to be, say, our current state. This is what you're inheriting. There isn't a team lead. You don't have a leadership structure on the right. You're missing a team lead for whatever reason. You got a pretty bottom-heavy organization with lots of people doing the work, but they're kind of just doing their own thing. They know roughly what they need to be doing, but they're not working beyond that. There's no work towards any grander strategy. Management is overworked. Management's unable to engage with you because they're just putting out fires, because there's only one VP and one lead for 8 teams. It's just not enough. So what you can do here is, based on everything that we've learned, work out who is it, what is it that we need. In this example, it's going to be leadership. We need people in charge, and we need people to be able to start breaking down that workload and making sure that it's not just 2 people that are the sole channel of communication from the individual contributors up to the CISO. Because the individual contributors are not going to be expected to have the skill at communication to give the CISO the information that he needs, and that's it. They're going to be talking in the language they understand, which is, oh, I shipped this commit, but this guy doesn't know what it is that he needs, but this guy doesn't know what he's doing either. And you're, as a CISO, going to be going like, I don't care. How bad is our AppSec program? And that is something that your VP is going to be able to tell you if they had the chance to look, because they weren't managing all of the interpersonal stuff that really the lead should be doing. That lead is doing it for 8 people. He's just not going to be able to, for 8 teams. There is no way that guy's managing his leads effectively as he could do if he was just doing the 2 teams that he should be managing in the diagram on the left. So unclear direction. There's no official leadership for half the organization. The chain, as it goes above the individual contributors, are overworked. Management can't engage, and we're not really achieving against that strategy. So you may need now to assemble a team to start fixing that. So now we're going into the final stretch here. So days 61 to 100. We're looking at, now that we've got plans, we're strategizing, we have an actual metrics to measure our incremental improvements towards executing on the strategy. We know how to ask for money, all sorts of things now. Implementation and execution is what we're going to go do next. That's what our last sort of the 3 months that we're looking at here in the first 100 days. So using a chess metaphor here, the pieces are set up. It's time to start executing. We now know what our short-term and long-term cybersecurity goals are. We've got metrics and guidance needed to make sure that we can measure our achievement against them. We know what resources we have to play with. We know what ingredients a solid business case for specific asks, more budget, will tend to require. We know what major gaps the organization has to an industry benchmark that senior management recognizes. They're just going to know, are we good against, in return to all the other companies that we're in competition with, or the companies that we partner with, or that our investors recognize? How are we doing against that? That's going to be the only thing that they're going to want for you most of the time. Or maybe they want them in more detail, but in general, it needs to be communicated in a way that they recognize. We need to know how to gauge security culture and awareness through different types of asking. You can't just be, what's this phishing email? What's wrong with that? So they need to know what phishing is, why is it important, what happens when you click on that. So we can gauge the security culture and awareness status of the organization. And then also that assembling the right team will be paramount and require work beforehand to successfully garner the resources you need. So let's talk about quick wins. Again, I said it before, was a good plan executed today is better than a perfect plan that never makes it off the page. And very, very few plans survive first contact in the way that they are on the paper. So you want to make sure that you engineer first contact as fast as humanly possible. There are going to be small projects that can be executed quickly, but have noticeable, tangible, positive impacts on the organization's security posture. In general, security parlance, it's low-hanging fruit, we call these. And they can be conducted in tandem with the larger, slower moving strategic initiatives. So what that is currency that you can use to help assuage senior management and C-level executives that progress is being made. It's that tangible data items that help you engineer a graph going upwards. And they can also help new security leaders very quickly build credibility with leadership because you're showing near immediate results. Is changing the password policy fixing all of our security issues? No. But the past one made no sense. It needed doing, so we sat down and got it done. Knocked it out in the first month. Awesome. That's a tangible data point you can use. It didn't fix everything. No one's pretending it did. But that's an example, say, of low-hanging fruit. Some good examples here could be, we've been talking about implementing MFA through group policy options. We have the technology here. We have Microsoft Authenticate. We just haven't forced people to use it. We haven't implemented it into our tech stack. Maybe that's the first thing we go for. It doesn't fix everything, but it's something we can point to that has had a positive impact. You can maybe plan and launch a phishing awareness campaign. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be fantastic, but it's better than nothing. And it's something that we can start showing impact. If people start clicking on the one that you managed to develop in 6 weeks, then it's probably worth going through and looking at social engineering consulting potentially, because you clearly have a weakness there. So if you were able to do it from an amateur point of view, that's low-hanging fruit to go ask for a budget on this consulting aspect. Could be done for near free with a few weeks of prep, or you can do a third-party simulation service. Something like NoB4 would be something you could use here. It could be something automated just to start off with, but it's something you can show. We did this, 5 people clicked, 10 people clicked, 100 people clicked. As long as now what we can do is next time around, see if we can get 9 or 4 people to click. And you also just review policies, take a sample, crack them internally, grab some passwords and show, look, our password policy says this. I've grabbed a sample of passwords and now we have XYZ. We managed to crack 4 out of 200 passwords. So that's not a problem overall about password strength. It's maybe those people need re-education. That's something you've done. That's something you can actually point to. We're doing tangible work. That would be done in tandem with all of the sort of slower moving strategic stuff that we've been talking about, fixing access control, moving from one provider to the other and making sure our control environment survives, et cetera, et cetera. Building stakeholder engagement. It's kind of time to evolve at this point then from planning and working out what the hell we're doing, how we're going to do it, and start truly engaging as part of the business. So I'd say after 2 months, you're starting to move into being an actual player and a role player here. And the way I see it here is that fundamentally cybersecurity is there to enable the business to operate in as secure a fashion as possible. It's not there to arbitrarily meet a given industry benchmark, and it's not there to meet the idea of secure that we have in our heads. Ask 12 CISOs what they think of a certain security standard, and you'll get 12 different answers. But you'll see where your strategy hasn't connected or properly incorporated the business's other units when people just aren't engaging. Why don't people care about this phishing thing? Why don't people care about my password thing? It's because you haven't engaged with them. You are enforcing something on them, making their lives more difficult, or giving them some sort of onerous requirement that they don't understand the reason for. You're not enabling the business. You are enforcing a rule upon them. Maybe that does need to be done, but maybe there's some communication that needs happening here. And if you're starting to hit those roadblocks, starting to hit those walls, it's usually a good sign that maybe you haven't really connected with the right business units, the right stakeholders that hold the key to getting everyone else to want to do what it is that you're doing. So it could be things here like the board, senior leadership, legal, HR, sales, people who are actually outwardly communicating with more people than anyone else, marketing, DevOps, your developers, security themselves, the actual security organization themselves, people actually managing your networks and firewalls, such people managing the infrastructure that powers your organization, the help desk, especially past MGM hack. Have you actually talked to these people more than once in the last 6 months? And it could be as simple as just having once a quarter, twice a quarter to start off with, having an interdepartmental meeting with those important stakeholder groups, and just ensure that you have a good understanding of how these groups conduct their work, independent of what it is that you do. And you'll start really getting a grasp for what isn't working right now, why they don't do this thing that you're asking them to do, and what isn't realistic, what is realistic for what you can ask them to do. Are you fundamentally going to get the sales team to be doing all of these onerous security requirements, or are they just going to ignore them because they're being monitored on how many their KPIs are all about how many calls they make? If they have to sign on every single time that they log into a computer, or every time they log into a different application because you implemented some sort of zero trust-esque architecture, they're going to drastically slow down the amount of work they're able to do because they should be able to log in once as opposed to 5 or 6 times. It might be more secure in your head, but in general, it's not realistic for the salespeople. It's going to slow them down. Their metrics are going to go down, and you're going to start having some real pushback from that department, even though it might be more in a technical sense secure. But you're going to get better buy-in when stakeholders understand why they're being asked to do something. If you could then maybe do a bit of a charm offensive and go, hey, there's a reason why we're asking you to sign in all these times, is because it's actually been this way that people get in. And as the people who talk to more people than anyone else and receive more documents left and right than anyone else, it's actually you guys that are most likely going to be the gate that people walk in, and we really don't want that to happen. But let's find out a way that we can configure the system to make sure that we're not slowing you down too much. Maybe then the sales team are a lot better at implementing this, and maybe they at least know why they're being asked to do it. Maybe they still don't like it, but they're actually doing it. That's progress. And that can be as simple as it starts off. That's building true stakeholder engagement. The people responsible for putting into practice that aren't in your organization are going to be the real decider of how successful you are. And the way you can do that is make sure they're understanding of what it is that you're trying to do. Why are you trying to do it? And that's true stakeholder engagement. That's something you can do from the top down and keep managing it as you increase your tenure with the organization you've joined. So effective reporting is a big one too. We always talk about when penetration testers hand reports over, it's where they live and die as their effectiveness is, do I understand what you've done and why do I care? It's a handy framework to use to report your own stuff up to the senior leadership, because they're going to be even more so than, say, the executive leadership that most penetration test reports are aimed at. You would be one of those people as a CISO. You're able to use that same principle to go, okay, we have had all of these different initiatives that we've looked at over the course of the year, or over the course of the last 3 months. How do I know? We know instinctually that we've done a bunch of work over the last couple of months. Everything's going really, really well. But from the senior leadership's point of view, they've just given you $500,000 as your fix this budget. They don't know any of it's gone. They don't understand what you've bought, why it's important. So the way of reporting that up in a way that they understand could be just keeping it as short and simple as possible and investing real time in having a clear, concise, replicable, and high-level upward reporting structure. And it could be simple as something that's in the front here, which is what's been done, what's in progress, what challenges and blockers do we have, how close are we to being done, and when should it be done by. I promise you from experience, these will be the 4 things that the people above you care about the most. What are you doing so I can tell someone else when they ask me? What's in progress so we know that we are actually currently doing something? Challenges and blockers. What do we need to do to fix it if I don't like the answer? And how close are we to finishing XYZ thing? That's going to be a question that someone's going to come right from the top, or maybe an investor that's not even, maybe just from a board level is going, well, how close are we to doing that? And you need to be able to go, about 50% estimated Q4 23. That'll be all usually they need to know. They'll come and ask you if they need any other information. It can be as simple as that. This being sent on a monthly basis will very quickly build a lot of goodwill because you're telling them in language they understand. Security awareness training was complete. So that's been done. Evaluation of results and tweaking of security awareness program based on feedback. We're doing that right now. What was a challenge we encountered? There was just a lower response rate than expected, but it turns out that's due to PTO season. It wasn't the way that we reached out. It was well done. It was well put together, but it just happened to be it was during summer. Had a lot of people out. So I would say that's not really something you need to worry about completion. Whereas something like a CrowdStrike installation, where you're actually implementing something net new into the organization, there's going to be testing, rollback testing, change management, etc. Maybe by that point, there are things that we're doing to get to the point with CrowdStrike's installed. There are like small sub steps that get me there. So budget constraints for Q4 would be a challenge here. It's going to make it really difficult to expand CrowdStrike to everyone because of licensing costs. We don't actually have the money to give it to everyone. So what do we do? If we contingent on budget being achieved, where we are able to do it, we're about 30% of the way through of a complete CrowdStrike installation, around Q1 24 at this point. Okay, then they may not like the answer, but they can't complain that they haven't had the information that they need to act. Do they want to give you that money? Is it that important to them? Or do we just manage and we do some sort of like license switching aspect? It's up to them. So, but at least you've now told them that this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing currently. Here's my issue with it. And here's when it should be done if I got the money I needed. And at that point, you can start building a business case so they can start accounting for the money they're going to give you, all the stuff we've already talked about. But fundamentally, this is one email on some sort of regular cadence. It looks the same. It's written in a way that's really easy to understand. This is going to be really effective reporting to people. It might be a little too simple for some people, but in general, you may be talking to someone from, say, a marketing or revenue background that has absolutely no idea what you're talking about when you start talking about MDR or incident response training, or you want to start talking about hardware upgrades, etc. They just see that as budget that they could have had. But if they understand what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it, you'll have a lot more effective stakeholder engagement upwards as well as downwards. So some of the last tactics we're going to look at here is a really useful methodology that a lot of militaries use called decentralized command. So we're looking at really a specific execution steps for what you're trying to achieve. They're going to be specific to the goals that you've developed over the last 100 days. But there's a principle of decentralized command that can really help you effectively execute on all of these strategies using the talented people that are working underneath you. There's no point you boiling the ocean, you'll just burn out. So what you're going to need to do is implement some way of getting the people underneath you and empowering them to achieve your strategy using their resources and using their ideas. You're going to get a lot more done that way. And it's one of the simplest ground warfare tactics that you learn in the military is around this idea of decentralized command. It's a command technique, if you're not familiar. Anybody here that's read anything by Jocko Willink, he's really, really solid on this. But it's a command technique where a larger group of soldiers can be broken apart, given an overall goal to achieve. And you trust as a leader that they'll devise the tactical plan to achieve it. So it's going to be less, I need you to go take that tree to get to that building, and I need to use that weapon to go do it. I just need you to clear this area of enemies. I don't really care how you go do it as long as that's what's achieved. Then the person above him has just gone, I need this area to be safe so we can put our satellite dish up. The guy above him's going, I don't really care how you do it, but we need communications back to home base. The guy at home base is like, I have no idea what's happening. I need information on the ground. And as you can see, that person up at the top who just wants information isn't telling the guy to go take that building because there's someone in it. It all goes up to the top where the tactical plan to achieve each person's strategy is decentralized from the person that gave the initial instruction. So this is going to be boiling down really to two things above all else if you want to implement that. If that sounds good to you, kind of being able to go, I want to achieve this. Here are the metrics I'm being measured on. Really interested to see how you guys do it, but I need you to get to this point. It's up to you how you do it. Here's a budget for what you need if you need resources. But in general, how you get here is up to you. If that sounds like a good way of running a team or running teams to you, then decentralized command might really help you out. But it boils down to two concepts above all else: clarity of mission, objectives, and what the guardrails are for making tactical decisions, and clear, understood lines of communication, and no shyness about using them. So here is where it kind of gets hard, because it's really easy to say and a lot harder to do. You recognize this diagram as being the ideal state from a couple of slides ago. Micromanagement is one of those things that you don't realize you're doing until someone feeds it back to you. You have to believe and actually trust that the people underneath you are capable of getting the job done. If they're not capable of getting the job done, then there's a good sign you've not got the right people underneath you. But there needs to be an environment where you can let go of micromanagement and that the teams underneath you can work, experiment, know how to make tactical decisions without your involvement, without fear of retribution if they make a mistake. If people are terrified of screwing up underneath you, there's something wrong. This won't work if people just aren't going to make a decision because they're terrified it's the wrong one and they're going to get yelled at. You can certainly step in if required as a leader and provide tactical guidance, but it's the if required portion is operative. If anyone underneath you in that chain of command doesn't truly trust that you're trusted to get the job done, if they know that you're fundamentally right on top of them with a finger going like, I wouldn't do that, this doesn't work. You just have a centralized command structure like any other. But if you can get this right and you are able to empower the organization underneath you with not just the ability to experiment and get jobs done and achieve objectives that are in line with your strategy, they know how to make those decisions. They know what they can and can't do themselves. And you're able to just watch it and see it happen. You're going to end up with really agile, responsive teams that can act quickly and decisively to execute on the plans that you produce. The way you can do that is establish clear reporting guidelines and cadences like you've done with senior leadership, and you'll have a really, really well-oiled machine in no time. So just to wrap it all up here, this is one of the last slides, is that over the course of the last 100 days, we've stepped in knowing absolutely nothing. Over the first 30 days, we work out what's on fire, what's around me, what do I have, what do I not have. We've got our 5s and 20s around us. What's dangerous right now, what's dangerous in a couple months' time. We know that now. The next 60 days are all about going, okay, I'm safe right now. What comes next? What am I going to do about it? What problems are here? What resources do I have to start actually solving some of these problems? And 61 to 100 is all going to be about, we've got a strategy. We know what resources we have. Let's start doing them. What do we tackle first? We should know that. Let's tackle it. Let's start moving on these larger strategic objectives. But overall, it's something that hopefully it was useful. If you're in charge of a new organization or that you're aspiring to leadership, this is something that if you're able to know this way in advance, it's going to really impress the people above you. If you're already in charge, this is going to be stuff that hopefully be useful as a handrail. Maybe it's stuff you've heard before, but it never really hurts to do the basics well. Okay, thank you.